So nice to meet you, Roisin. Am I pronouncing that right?
It's Roshan, like the ocean.
Roshan. Okay,
Yeah,
Roshan.
and it's lovely to meet you.
I'm really
I
excited
want to
about
make
this
sure.
talk.
Me too.
Um, so I guess I'll tell you a little bit about myself, my practice. So I was born and raised in Ghana, West Africa, and kind of always knew I wanted to be an artist. And my interests have more or less stayed the same over the course of my practice, like from school into just like practicing as like a full-time artist. Um, I've always been interested in telling stories. I've always been interested in sort of like the mythological realms, like ideas about religion and tradition and why we do the things we do and how we behave the way we behave, and thinking about textiles as a way of um, uh, communicating, like from actual imagery and messages on the textiles to things we wear. And this, in a roundabout way, got me to thinking about masquerading as a sort of mode of moving through the world. I've been looking a lot at the different masquerade cultures in Western Africa. There's, very varied in their histories and their the way they manifest. And I was really just sort of very curious about how um, they came to be. And somewhere along the line, due to my interest in, telling stories and sort of like trying to come up with new ideas, I wanted to go in a different path, and I sort of sort of changed my approach to my art making practice, where I wanted to sort of start with this overarching like general theme, and then my practice would be a way for me to explore different ideas within it. And this is where this sort of storytelling, myth making, world building over like idea came from. And I really wanted to, I had been sort of having issues with, moving through the world as a woman, um, feeling like there are all these things that are being held back by, traditions, and not necessarily like being forced to do things, but, there's these ways that, family members who talk to you about, oh, you should do this way, or you should dress this way. And this, I mean, obviously times have changed significantly since I started really thinking about doing this, but I think that a lot of a lot of ideas that run through my work are sort of universal. I call them afflictions that women sort of deal with. And I wanted to create these fictional avatars, these fictional characters that would represent like deviance in like a broad term, where they kind of went against the grain of what is typically sort of societally acceptable. And I wanted them to be the basis or like the inspiration for this sort of masquerade um, that I'm working on sort of developing. And that these avatars, these characters, that I call them skins because I kind of like this idea of being able to wear them and sort of be imbued by them and become them. I wanted them to sort of be able to inspire us in our day-to-day lives, um, to strive for like the things that we want to do without the fear of being held back by all sort of other societal pressures. This is sort of like a large, like a very overarching theme. And this is like when I really started out like 4 or 5 years ago with this idea. And the story has sort of been changing and sort of becoming more and more specific. Um, and now I'm currently sort of in a speculative fiction, um, I guess, state of mind. I mean, I'm approaching it from a speculative fiction state of mind where I'm thinking about the lives of these avatars. Like, what if they were gods that were gifted to us by like a supreme being, for example? Like, and they were sort of dropped into the earth. What is that going to look like? And then, so this is so what I do with my work is that I sort of create bodies of work which are part of a larger idea. And this is the project that I intend to work on for hopefully the rest of my life. So it's a really large and long-term project, which has like many chapters. And so it seems it's quite difficult to explain in the grand scheme of things, but that's sort of like where I'm coming from in like the like how I approach my practice. Could you also tell me a bit about yourself, and then we can sort of jump into I have a few questions and curiosities I have about your work and your practice.
Yeah, thank you, Na. So, my name is Roisin Jones, and I have similar themes in the sense of how I approach my art. And it's kind of taken a little bit of a crazy journey, and evolved in sort of these sort of amazingly complicated but tangled threads. Um, I would say as I started out, I was more trying to find my own voice, and that came naturally to me by sort of embodying characters, embodying mythological entities in the sense of Anansi, which has been a big part of my work recently. And maybe when we get to that section, I'll talk a little bit more of what I'm working on right now. So I really do connect to this idea of masquerade. I really do connect to this idea of theatre. I am a theatre school kid. I grew up
Mm.
in the theatre. I studied film and media, and so I kind of always approach my art from that lens and photography.
See.
So I'm very
Okay.
much thinking of it in an image lens and thinking of things quite symbolically. And it's kind of the where I go. I'm trying to think as well, like my journey. And kind of how it's transformed as well. I started looking from a world building aspect similar to you, but then I realized that even though I wanted to create a commentary about what society's been about, I look at it from a diasporic lens and from my own cultural heritage.
Hmm.
I am British Caribbean, and so I have all of these multiple identities wrapped up into this one space. And so in a way, that is the masquerade in my work. That's like having to shift from these different states of being. And I wanted to comment on that, and I wanted to look at that societally. But as I've like grown as an artist, I've realized I needed to introspect for myself, and how can I create tools to the things that I'm seeing and commenting on and talking about. And so it's kind of like a little a little bit a bit more about me. And I think a big part of my work, for better or worse, is this idea of materiality. But I'm very curious. I'm a lifelong student. I love to learn new skills. I love to learn about new ways of creating. And I think for me, it might seem scattered, but it's sort of I love to approach my art by looking at the materials that can speak to what the story that I'm trying to tell. Um, and yeah, it's a lot about healing at the
Mm.
moment. I felt like at first my work was more about kind of like, look at all of this injustice, like look at all of these things. Like I don't understand it. Why do we feel these things too? Like, how can I make and show up for myself? How can I
Yeah.
express myself? And since I've gone on to that journey, is kind of opening up new doors, especially when I'm looking at these stories that I'm interacting with. It's kind of recontextualized it a little bit of like how maybe the characters that I'm either playing or the character of myself,
Mm.
how do they go about things in their life, but also how do they reckon with the world that they're in. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for um talking about yourself and your work. And it's funny because when you mentioned sort of like deciding to go a little bit more introspective, I had that realization too like a couple years ago, because I think when I started with this project I was like talking about very general things, and I was really trying to think about why there's like something not hitting. I couldn't figure out what I was not getting, and I realized that I really arrived at that decision to do the work because of personal issues in the first place. So to be true to myself and to the work, I owed it to myself to actually be, because I think had this tendency to remove myself from the work, but it made the work much more richer putting myself back in there and being honest with the reasons why I was making certain decisions or making certain material decisions and stuff like that. Um, yeah, that's great. I would love to talk some more about that. I was looking a lot about your work and your thesis and all that. So I'm looking forward to it. My first question has to do with the word patina because I was looking at your work a lot, and that word kept like popping into my head, and I was thinking about the word as um it's the meaning of the word patina in the sense that it shows it's like a record of time passing. It's
Mm.
like a memory in a sense, and it shows that something has happened in a sense, right? And I was looking at like the copper works and the bronze works, and then like the kiln fire, the raku pottery that you'd fired, and I thought it was quite beautiful and very poetic how it connected with your concept of like how you use memory and like the archive as like a I guess like a connection to this concept of a patina, and I was hoping you could speak a little bit more about that.
Um, yeah, no, for sure as well, because of I think that is somewhat a happy accident, but it's kind of weird because I have gone from an image maker to like a maker. Like I'm interacting with metal and clay and all of these materials, and there is that memory, and there's also transformation, especially with raku, because raku goes through quite a brutal transformation when you're doing the glaze. You have to reduce it in a kiln, and then you take it out, and then you put it in sawdust, and then you get this beautiful
Uh,
patina. And
yeah.
I wanted all of my objects, and this sort of speaks to world building as well, to feel like they're talking to each other. So it
Hmm.
doesn't matter that it's a clay pot, it speaks to my copper pieces.
Yeah.
And there's that exchange there, and there's that transformation there. And you do see like that passage of time, that marking, and sort of, I don't know how to explain myself very well, but you do see that transformation, and it becomes something beautiful, something aged. It has a sense of place, and
Yeah.
a lot of my work, and especially with my master's thesis, was about this idle place and memory, and how do we make marks on the world. And I sort of looked at it about the body, how memory takes place in the body, and that we're
Hmm.
receptacles for
Yeah.
memory. But the great thing about material is that they also too have their own idea. They have their own history. They are not passive. They're narrators. They speak, and their speaking is that patination.
Hmm.
That's how they show that they've existed, that they've
Yeah.
been here. What environments have they been in? If you put some metal in a certain environment, it's gonna pick up something,
Yeah.
and that speaks to it visually.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's
That's
I'm
cool.
glad you picked up on that as well.
I was just thinking of like what you going off of what you said about the materials and how they react to whatever environment that they've been put in versus us humans who are mostly outward looking. You pretty much look the same, but we're really changed through like the different experiences that we've been. So there's this like sort of tension or like a difference in how we kind of I guess react to I don't know different things affecting us or in different ways. So that's yeah, pretty cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to ask a question back as well?
Yeah.
So I want to say I love your work. I genuinely
Thank you.
do.
Thank you.
I didn't realize. I was like, I recognize this name, and I realized I've actually seen
Oh,
your booth in Venice, in that Venice Biennale.
cool.
It was a
Okay.
very, very good Biennale.
Thank
And
you.
so
Thank you
my
so
question
much.
is about this fictioning and the speculative, and a little bit more on this journey that you're going on in terms of your materials, and how do you find out that you want to use the materials that you want to use, and what do they mean to you? I hope that's a good
Ooh, this is
question a
gonna
little
this is a great question. I have to like
bit.
reel it in because when I started this project, I really wanted it to be as original. I'm putting this in quotes as possible, where to the best of my ability, I wanted to come up with new ideas and new like associations and new combinations and things, right? So it required me to some degree unlearn some original associations and materials and stuff that I already had. But then, it was getting a bit too rigid, so I basically wanted to sort of go with the flow in that respect. But for example, the works in Venice, the bead is like a material that I associated or I intentionally associated with the character Lara, who represents this idea of control, who has control over her sexuality and who has access to her body. And I've been thinking about the history of the bead and, in Africa and in Ghana and like the different culture, like specific ethnic groups. There's a specific ethnic group that is like mainly associated with beads and bead making in Ghana, which is like the Krobo people. And the bead is like so important in their culture in that it's used as a mark, and it's actually, it's a cultural marker for many different like countries in Africa and I would say the world. But I was specifically looking at how it was used in their culture. It's considered to be the one is what's the word? The rites of passage. They're used during rites of passage. And the girls, basically for the girls to become women, they're sort of adorned with all these beads. And they usually sort of like topless, so you see like nude, you see the breasts and everything. But I was like less interested in the sexualized aspect of it and sort of what the bead has come to mean. It's considered to be something that is worn for beauty. It was used as a form of currency, but I also wasn't intentionally wanting to use the bead in Venice because Venice has a history of bead making, and so does Ghana. Um, and so I wanted to sort of like meld those two ideas and come up with something that could speak to both of these histories. Granted, I did use crowbar beads for the waist of the sculpture in the center of the figure in the center, but I used they're called check beads because they are silver lined, they are bugle beads. And I just really love how they catch light. And that's like really what attracted me to them because I've been thinking about ways to, I don't want to say mechanize my work because that involves machinery, but I was thinking about ways that the bead could could exist in multitudes in a space and would react to the way people moved around it in a way that sort of like would draw you in because this is kind of in my mind is how I see this character, this skin, this figure, Lara. And so I was trying to use the bead to sort of like lure people in, but then there's this like you don't know what to do with the work because it's like it's precious, it's made of glass. There's this thing in the middle, and it's like you want to know what it is, but you can't really get to it because you don't know if you can or you can't. And so I wanted to play with that sort of uncertainty in the exhibition. And I wanted that to translate because that's how I see this figure. Like she is really about, trying to draw people in, but then there's like always going to be a barrier between you and her, as you, the audience, and her. And so I kind of created these sort of like little storylines around each of the characters. And then I try to think of, okay, what materials would work well with this scenario? And then can I, for later works, make this material the material that is associated with this character? And then how can I reinterpret this material in a different way? For example, for a 2D, not 2D work, but like a collage work versus like an installation or whatever. So it's like really, there is an element of creating like creative constraints for myself, which is specifically great for me or particularly great for me because I can go like my mind just goes like, oh, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And it gets overwhelming. So by creating these constraints, I get a little bit more creative in how I can sort of like interpret or reinterpret the material for for the specific, artwork that I want to make. But it is something that I have intentionally There's like an association that potentially are created so that people, over time, as I continue making these works, it's easier to read the work as well. Yeah.
There is definitely that material sensibility in your work, and it's sensual,
Thank you.
especially in your use of color and your use of texture, and it really comes through. You kind of see that these characters kind of each are like a window into what they've got going on. It's kind of like when you open the door and or
Yeah.
if you look in a city, you can see through people's windows and
Yeah.
wondering what's going on there. There's that mystique, so I definitely see that. It's beautiful.
I'm so glad you caught on to that. It's one thing to try to hope that the work does something, and it's another to actually hear that that's like something that people are actually getting from it. So thanks for making that observation. I was another I guess question comment I had, because I was thinking about your choice of materials too, and I was
Mm,
looking specifically at your use of, I guess, copper.
yeah.
And I I guess like most artists who have tried a bunch of different sort of like art practices or whatever have probably done printmaking or like intaglio with like a copper plate, which is like, so that was my first association. And then when I was reading about how you made the work, I was like, that's so cool that you sort of are playing with expectations, because instead of using the copper to make the print, you're making the print on the copper, which is pretty cool. And so I just like was curious about whether that was like an intentional decision, or like how did you come to using copper in the first place? And then like choosing to use it in that specific way.
So I think it happened kind of not organically out of like experiments. So I do work with bronze, but it's a bit of a process. So I haven't made any bronzes yet, but I'm
Mhm.
hoping to. But in the bronze process, my relief, it gets destroyed essentially. And there was a lot of things I was reading about simulacra and Baudrillard and this idea of the lost copy, and a lot of diaspora culture, or in terms of history,
Mm,
is a lost copy.
right.
And that kind of, it connected, especially with
Yeah.
the intaglio, like having the first copy of something that could be disseminated. So
Yeah.
in terms of the bronzes, the first one is lost, and
Yeah.
you just have these iterations that exist. And again, it has patina. It last looks like something you might find in the sea, but with the bronzes, it's the opposite. It's like the
Mm,
beginning of that story, and especially wanted to use it for one of the personal pieces, which is It Hurts in This Body Still,
yeah.
which this idea of having that original copy, and even though it's a fabricated memory or fabricated essence of the story I want to tell, which is one of my personal stories,
Yeah.
it kind of felt poignant to have that starting point. And I don't know, it's quite funny because the copper kind of came to me.
Mm,
I don't know, it sort of
that
came into my
happens.
life. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's like I want to be made, like something wants to be made out of this, clearly.
Yeah.
Pardon me, sorry
Yeah.
for my phone. But yeah, definitely something wanted to be made out of this. And I think it's kind of beautiful. And we do have a very rich history with these particular materials, bronze and copper as well. And it's actually meant to be seen as a sacred material. Don't quote me
Mm.
because I can't read my sources, but it's meant to be seen as a sacred material. This copper, it's meant to be quite an intuitive material,
Mm.
and the more I work with it, the more the work becomes more intuitive and becomes more spiritual. And I think as well, it's quite funny as well because it seems quite masculine, and I'm absolutely not concerned with making it masculine. I'm quite small. The things that I've
Mhm.
made are quite big, but then I still want to bring that femininity and feminine
Mhm.
essence with it, and that's kind of my relationship with copper. Yeah, and I like it. It's
Cool.
beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, this is like an extra comment in addition to, well, in relation, sorry, to both, my questions about copper and like the patina, where you don't really know what's going to happen when you throw it in. Like there's this sort of relinquishing of control that happens in, like, I guess, like in alchemy, or like doing something sort of like experimental, or using like scientific approaches to doing stuff. It's like you know to some degree what's going to happen, but then it's like whatever comes out, and then I do with it what it is. So there's this interesting, thing happening. I guess it's like an art. It's like this is what happens with art making, and I guess it's with you're doing making an experiment or you're making an artwork, and then but yeah, there's something quite beautiful about that. I think, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you as well. It's half kind of my studio is half an artist studio, half like a workshop slash lab
I
because
love that.
because of the things I have to mix together to
Yeah,
make it happen.
yeah.
But that's the beauty of it, and I don't want to lose that in my practice. I want
Mm,
to have that sort of excitement and that curiosity. So I think it kind of links a little bit
hmm
the question because I wanted to see there's an idea of bringing up this idea of femininity and this feminine expression, especially with these characters that are kind of going against the grain.
hmm
I guess it's less a question, more a comment. I would just like to know a little bit more about how these characters that you're building and how they're becoming real to you. Are they are they kind of like a wish fulfillment in a way? Like, because they are, I use the word avatar, and
Yeah,
that means embodiment, and that means
yeah,
you're in communion with
yeah.
these entities in the work. So that's kind of where I wanted to
It's
ask
like
you.
a push and pull, like it's a bit of both in the sense that I modeled them after myself and my desires and wishes and like the extreme versions of people women I want to be, or I wish that I could be, but due to I don't know how life is and the fact that these are fictional or whatever, there's no way this is actually going to happen in real life because they're just like in terms of like they're moral, they are very morally ambiguous. Like they're not necessarily good or bad, but they don't really react to society the way we as humans who actually live on this earth do, type of thing. um so in that sense there is a link to me, and it's quite intuitive. But I did mention, like in the very beginning when I was talking about the work, about how like this they're all representing very sort of universal ideas of um things that I feel like women have been through. Like, for example, my work in the show currently, um, Nyeti, which is in the center, she represents sort of like rage and revenge and like vengeance, and thinking about how, you know, women can be put in situations where, due to, their stature, like how small they are, or like being unsafe or whatever, like they don't have the the ability or the possibility to react to things that enrage them, because you've been taught to like hold it in. You're supposed to be the person that people are supposed to be relaxed. Like there's this whole trope about female rage and like black woman rage and blah 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 blah. I wanted to tap into that, but I wanted to make it more uh specific and more poignant. But in my mind, Nyeti represents this idea of like a woman who's been wronged and who is just wants to like enact revenge on whoever it is, right? This is not, this is probably morally like very wrong, obviously, but there's like something about, that you get this sort of like feeling of like anger and just like bitterness about something that you're so upset about. And usually it's quite transient, right? It's like a really short period of time that it happens. But sometimes you need something like an outlet to like to scream or to like to do something to let it go. And so I created her for that particular moment. And in sort of designing like her character and her behavior and her qualities and her essences and whatnot. This is where like me trying to go against the grain didn't work so well, because I associated her with the color green, and I was thinking about bitterness and like there's a lot of mini green words that are associated with like, I guess, badness, like I don't know, poison ivy or whatever, that kind of thing. Um, but I was like trying to imagine like if when she was being depicted in these like flag paintings that I was making, like what does the scene really look like? And I did want there to be some sort of like she's always sort of like in an ambivalent kind of it's like there's an ambivalence to the scene, but there's an element of like danger, but you're not really sure whether she's in danger or causing the danger. It's supposed to be sort of like what is her deal kind of thing. Like she doesn't look like she can do anything like or cause any damage, but like the idea is that she can. And so that's sort of how um the scenery that I developed for Nyeti, like that's how it came about. And in this particular work, I was thinking about teeth and mouths and tongues, like and like sharp tongues and like snake, like the sort of the forked tongue, which is like a sort of like a snake or serpenty type thing. Um, but then I started thinking of like, when you enter like a cave being a mouth, and then I think it's the stalactites that come from up from above, which kind of look like teeth. So I was like, there was a lot of I was making all these sort of visual connections and stuff. And they always are quite like ambiguous, like what is it? And they can be quite hard to read. But I think that there's something about that which keeps it open enough that people can look at it and sort of like get different interpretations from the work as well. This is not, so the work is not necessarily supposed to be like, this is what it's supposed to be. I say like, this is what I was thinking when I made the work, but of course it may read in a completely different way. So that's kind of like how that came about. And the 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 two other works that are on either side of Nyeti in the show are from a solo exhibition that I had where I was trying to tell the story, or not trying to, I was telling the story about Peli, who represents this idea of seduction. And the very first thing you think about when you think of seduction is like, oh, it's sexual, and it's a woman trying to get something from a man, or whatever, or you're trying to get something from someone else. And I was interested in not interested in the sexual parts of it. I was interested in like the trying, like overwhelming a prey in a whatever kind of way to get something that you want. So you're completely confounded, like basically confounding someone and or confounding, whoever. And the entire exhibition was designed in a way that it was split into two parts. The first part was meant to be the ritual. And so in this scenario, um Peli, who is the skin, is invoked or is called upon through a ritual. And the ritual was the wrapping of different body parts with thread. So I was thinking, so thread is like thread is like the material that I associate with Peli. And I love the idea that because I really wanted to incorporate stitching and like multiple types of like I guess like art making approaches into the work. And so I thought like if the thread was the beginning thread of the artwork, like how could I sort of like use that within the work to make something larger, and like what would that look like? And so the two works on either side of Nyeti are basically two scenes of like a person, like a woman, like the performing the ritual of wrapping different parts of her body with the thread, which calls Peli into her body and causes the different parts of her body to transform into sort of like tentacular, um, I don't know, appendages. So like her hair becomes longer, her fingers become longer, her tongue becomes longer. So it's like thinking of different parts of the body and how they could be transformed. And so in that sense, it's still like, there is this like archetype of like a woman who is like um a seductress like that has existed for many ages, right? But then I was like thinking about, you know, what are the different existing like strong women archetypes or like historical figures that existed in like that we in our like in like the West African lore, for example. So I was thinking of Mami Wata, who has like the hair, and she is also known to be quite like a like she sort of pulls you in, and but you sort of like have to give her something for you to get something type of thing. Um, or there's like another one in Ghana called like Madam High Heels, she always wore red heel. And she kind of like would, I can't remember, the story changes depending on where you hear from, but it was like a story that sort of permeated like our childhood, and you could hear her red heel like click clacking in the dark. It was like really freak, like there are all these like kind of scary horror type stories, right? And so I'm pulling this information from each of them. There is a bit of like grotesqueness in there. And I was thinking a lot about like woman and the grotesque. And I've been reading about historic like Greek stories and about from different parts of the world, where women kind of changed into snakes or into like different kind of um, creatures. And there was this sort of interesting thing that I kept coming up against where they were always being punished for doing something to someone, or like being punished by a god for not, responding to their advances or whatever. And then this punishment was becoming grotesque. So in this exhibition, I really wanted there to be like a decision to change like herself, like she was making this decision to do it herself. So there's like, bringing the agency, putting the agency back into the woman's hands in that respect, and her deciding to become grotesque is sort of like an empowerment in the form in a making her empowered, basically. And so those like smaller works are quite important to understanding the larger story, because they really sort of like show that this is like an action that was intentional, which had like a reaction afterwards. Yeah. That was so very like long and but yeah, that's sort of like where, yeah, so that just like an example of like, what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking of the characters, and how, I mean, the work manifests itself in different types of ways and different types of materials. Yeah. Um, I guess talking like about your works in the show. I guess you can talk a lot. If you could talk a little bit more about the copper, but just like I had one more thing to add to it, because I noticed after I looked at a lot of your other works that I noticed like the sort of falling figure was like it seemed like it was like a recurring image which showed up again in the work, and I was sort of curious about you know um what that meant in the original context, and how you sort of maybe interpreted or reinterpreted it for the work in the show, and then you can sort of, I guess, talk about your material choice for that as well.
I'm excited as well because when you bring up umami water, and that's actually sort of the research I'm doing right now,
Okay.
and this idea of embodying sort of chaos and this sort of quote unquote wayward woman, this sort of lost woman, and flipping that because of
Hmm.
she's only lost in the context of control and domination. She is herself, and she's like an archetype of whatever, she's either an archetype for water, so she's
Hmm.
that mother nature figure, and
Yeah.
I love that. In terms of the work that's in the show and this recurring feel of falling, I think it's me. I think when I'm talking about myself, I'm falling, and it
Mm,
might be falling into another state, especially in faith, which is one of the works in the
yeah.
show.
Hmm.
It's about grabbing that little bit of faith and reaching out
Mm,
when you are in this turmoil and being able to embrace that sort of uncertainty, but doing it in love. And I suppose it's also talking about color as well. um for me, at least for the show, these works are um it's me allowing myself to embrace color, to embrace form, to
hmm.
express that. And I've definitely been reading about this, color being a way of protest in the colonial and decolonizing and
Romantophobia.
art. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I like that, and allowing myself, because before I was more looking at materiality and texture. I love texture. And when
Hmm.
in my photography, that's kind of what I go for. I'm really looking for the textures and things. And when I'm very sensory in that sense, I'll look
Hmm.
for the interesting story in that. But these women that I featured, I guess one is where I am, which is in
Hmm.
faith, where I'm like trying to grab that small bit of faith, trying to grab that inspiration, that courage. And in the other picture in communion is kind of like a wish. What that I want to embody. Sort of you got this
Mm,
woman that is the warrior, you got this woman that is the seductress, she's holding the stick, she's not
that's
afraid.
like, yeah.
Um, and I I love that. I don't know, it's very weird that women are always associated with reptiles.
Yeah.
It's I don't know what that
It's
is,
a
but I
fear.
don't
There's
know.
this
Yeah.
fear of the unknown, I guess. Like there's, and it's always like a, it's used to control, but it's, I think it's just like it has to do with fear, with fear. At least that's like what I've read historically or something. At least, yeah.
And that like the idea that the snake goes and it sorry, I'm even doing it, aren't I? It sort of burrows into the darkness of things, and
Mm, hmm.
I think there is a beauty in that. And when I think about it, when I wanted to create these works, I wanted them to be so feminine and girly and nostalgic and I don't know, cute and
Yes.
a different form of sensibility, unserious in a way. Serious because of what is trying to come out of me in the works
Yeah.
is serious and
Yeah.
it is something that I'm trying to exercise and very
Hmm.
personal, but doing it in a way that's freeing. And I think I see that in
Mm,
your work of like the characters, like, you know, they're letting it all hang out. They
hmm.
are unconcerned and
Yeah.
unbothered
Yeah.
about how they're being viewed
Yeah.
and especially in this idea of ritual and
Hmm.
that there is this idea of ritual and the feminine and I think that can be a form of self-care like
Mm,
this idea
I
of
agree.
like in reinvesting in the feminine. I don't know if I answered your question but
I think you
yeah,
did, you
yeah,
did. Well, it
yeah,
was a multi-question, it was like a
yeah,
multi-pronged question, but yeah, you did. I what you like, I like what you said about like the choice of color. I mean, coming from somebody, I mean, I guess you probably didn't use as much color before, and so you're trying
yeah,
to get much more into it. I am on the opposite spectrum where I'm like, oh, so much. I'm like, throw color in. I'm just like, I mean, mostly I really do love a good, strong color because I feel like that it does have this ability, it has this like ability to make you feel something from seeing it, right? And especially when it's like when there's scale involved as well, where you feel like you're sort of encompassed by it. So yeah, there's like an emotional, I do have this emotional like connection to color. So it's exciting to hear like someone else talk about their own experiences with it. I mean, with the show that I had last year, that with the Peli pieces on each side, the ritual. Um, I painted the entire space pink specifically because I wanted it to seem like it was like, oh, this is like, there's nothing bad going on in there. Like pink is supposed to be like super girly and like not threatening in any way. But then red is also like a sort of like a more mature, womanly type color as well. So I kind of like wanted to um I guess put them next to each or put them in the same space and have them sort of like speak to each other as well. I wanted to ask you also, I don't know if we've answered all the questions, but about your scale, your choice of scale, because I was looking at the dimensions of like I guess, are they shadow box? Would you call them a shadow box? Like I don't know, or frames of with
yeah.
sort of with pigment. Basically, they're basically sort of like saturated with pigment, and it's like a quite an intense color. At least from the, I mean, I haven't seen the works in person, but from the images I saw online, they're quite intense. And so I was like curious about whether you were interested, or you would like in your choice in using these colors, whether you were interested in sort of like evincing some sort of emotional response from people looking at the works.
Yeah, definitely. And I think having them small, so everything I've made usually starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Hmm.
So I think approaching these works, I was like, no, that's smaller as well. Like I know that was also part of the sort of task, but also I
Yeah.
kind of I don't know, there's something really beautiful about something small. I'm starting to learn that and the delicacy and like I don't know, it
Hmm.
has a there's a different relationship when
Hmm.
you're creating for that
That's true.
size.
Yeah.
And when I wanted to make these boxes, I kind of see them like fragments, and that's I don't know,
Hmm.
I've posted that as well, like fragments of what is it in a memory that could be in a color as well? What is it in a space that you can invoke an emotion with that color? When you talk about like the divine or like the sublime, the things that
Supply.
we feel awe about,
Yeah.
what is it?
Hmm.
How do you express that? And I wanted to do that explicitly with material and color
Yeah.
and also to get over my phobia of color. So, I was like, it's quite nice and beautiful. It's like having a moment with that color. I'm like,
Yeah.
what does that green make me feel? That makes me feel, I don't know,
Mm.
it makes me feel good. I'm like, that's
Yeah.
the green for me, that's the green of happiness,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I wanted to bring to that and to bring that whimsy and to really respond to the this this exhibition with that too,
Yeah.
because this idea of alchemy and color, like, well, how do you alchemize emotion? Well, we do that through
Mm.
color. We do
Hmm.
that through things.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and adornment. Adornment. I love that word you as well that you use because I don't know, there's something about adorning something. And I really wanted to bring that to, but doing it in a like almost a kitsch girly way of like being able to, this is my way of creating something that's royal,
Hmm.
that's I don't know what the word is.
It's
I don't know.
delicate though. It's like
But like
like
there's a tenderness to it.
there's
That's
a
what I wanted
tenderness
to
to it.
bring.
Yeah.
And a play. And I
Hmm.
think especially with those smaller pieces, they are I am very grateful to Soza and Adora as well because I it allowed me to play. And I think I want to bring that into art right now.
Yeah.
I think it's what we need. The world
Hmm.
is very uncertain. We need to be able to interact in a way that feel maybe we're transmuting deep hurt and trauma,
Yeah.
but we can that play, bringing that play element to it is definitely healing for me. So
Yeah.
yeah.
There's something also to say about like this like them being so small does feel like you're kind of looking at a portal into like another it's like this sort of intimacy involved in experiencing the work because you really have to get up close
Yeah.
to kind of see it. And so there's something special about that way of experiencing a work versus having to stand further back to sort of look at it in its entirety, um, which is quite beautiful as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Um,
Do you guys have more questions for each other, or should we're about 15-ish minutes out,
um,
or should I?
I guess I have like one more question, but yeah, I had like four questions and all, but it's yeah, we can sort of I don't know what you wanted to do with
Okay.
Chosa. Like how do you want to continue this?
Okay, you can ask your question. Roshan, do you have a question?
I guess
It
it's
also
more,
doesn't
I
have
don't
to
know
be
if
a
it's
question. It could be like an area of like discussion. Maybe there's a
yeah.
part of your practice
Yeah,
that,
actually, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I do have um so I guess we can continue
yeah,
the chat
yeah.
then. Um I so my question, my I guess I would say my last question, um, as I was getting to know your work and sort of like your motivations for the direction to take your work in, I don't know, I felt a sort of affinity towards you, but in a kind of a same but separate way, and I'll explain why. You talked about being British Caribbean and having this like dealing with this idea of trying to connect to um this part of you that maybe you didn't really fully have like or get a chance to fully experience. And I wanted you to talk a little bit more about that. My for background, I grew up in Ghana up until high school, and then I moved to the United States, which is where I mean I started making art in Ghana, but then I guess my the ideas that I was really interested in exploring kind of came more formed became more apparent to me while I was in the state. And I had this And to this day still have this sort of feeling of this disconnect of being in like an in-between place where I'm not really part of one place or another, because I have been lived in Ghana for, I don't know, almost 15 years. And I've spent like majority of my adulthood, well, not adulthood, but like, 20s into my 30s in the States. And so there I have these sort of like different um parts of me that are, I guess they are what make me me, but it's like this feeling of like not really knowing where you belong. And I was curious about your experience with that and how that sort of ties into or plays into your work and your practice.
I just wanted to ask you a similar question as well, because I know that you've moved as well. And
Yeah.
especially in this last year, I found this sense of self. I think this is why I've gone introspective,
Mm-hmm.
because at home I'm like, well, none of these parts of myself, they add up. I grew up in a predominantly white community,
Mm-hmm.
and my family is multinational, like multi-ethnic as well. So it's like I have this internal space that I've grown up with that kind of looks like how the world should be. But when I leave the house, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, why do I feel this disconnect? Why can't I fully step into being British?
Yeah.
And so I've had to really explore that, for my own healing, for my work. And it wasn't until I sort of really came to Jamaica, explored my roots here, understood like why we have like I do it more in like folklore, like family sort of
Mm-hmm.
archival work, where I'm like, okay, well, now I know why that we
Yeah.
have this saying, or this sort of, I don't know, value within my family, and what part of the lineage it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But it made me change about this idea of home, and I explored it in my thesis, and I'm still exploring it, of really like, where can home be? And it is definitely in the body. It's where you put it. It's in people. Excuse me. Just wait for them to drive past. But yeah, it's in the people around me. I had to find home in people around me.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I feel very emotional right now when I say that, because I think it's taken all of this
That was a
time. It took
time.
all my
Yeah.
20s to find a sense of security within myself. And I think as well, you can see that me exploring it in my work. I'm in Jamaica again as well, and I'm having another revelation of where, like, I've been experiencing homesickness for the first time. I'm an avid traveler. I love to travel. My whole life, my family, like, you don't miss us. I'm like, no, I don't. But for the first time, I've been feeling homesickness for
Mm.
being in the UK.
Yeah.
So it's really funny about that. And I think it's that's ever shifting, trying to,
Yeah.
like, it's almost like trying to catch a
Trying to
shadow.
cat. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
um
spot on. Yeah.
and also as well, like, it's a beautiful thing to see how places change you. And that's why I wanted to ask you about this new adventure for you,
Yeah.
and how you're feeling that changed you, and who you are, maybe even your art and the stories you
Well,
wanted to tell.
it's, I think it needed in hindsight, it felt like it needed to happen because I let me know if you've heard about this or had this experience where when you're in a place, you kind of, because it's where you grew up and where you don't look at it from an outsider's perspective. Things just happen because they do. This is the tradition. This is how we do things. This is what we wear. This is where we go. This is how we bury the dead. This is how we bring new babies into the world, type of thing. And it's like, this is tradition and it is what it is. And then you go to another place. So you move to a different place and then you start like, I don't know, people ask you questions and then you start talking about things and then they keep asking you more questions to like explain and you're like, I don't know why this happened. And then this is me. I'm speaking about me now. And then I start, thinking about it and like questioning like how do traditions come to be? Like why is kente the such an important cloth like why is cloth such an important part of like culture, like things like that. And that's what got me to where I am now, because I had to have this sort of like realization of like I don't know anything. I know things happen, but I don't know why. And it was like then the being curious, like being wanting to know more, wanting to know the why, that sort of like led me down the path that I am. So I'm like eternally grateful for that happening. Of course, I'm like, of course I miss it's like you miss something that you never had, because like I didn't really grow up after I moved to the States. I didn't really have that relationship with Ghana as I did when I was much younger. So I think to some degree, my work is a way for me to be able to like go back into that and like get like learn more and like apply that into my work and like take like I don't know how to say, for example, using the Asafo flag as a point of reference for the flag paintings is a way to sort of reference something that is like a huge part of like the visual culture coming out of Ghana. But being able to like do it, wanting to do it respectfully, but also to say, if people are not familiar with this, looking at my work can lead them to go find out about the thing that it was inspired by. So there's like this idea of, trying to pay homage to like what it is that has inspired me and it's like gotten me onto this path. So I try to do it, and I hope I'm successful at doing it in like with a sense of like of respect and like honoring um like all the things that came before me that are sort of like kind of within me or like are flowing through me in a way that I can sort of pass on these ideas and messages in like in a different way. Yeah.
No, I like that. Beautiful. It's almost like you're trying to re-pull yourself back. Sorry, so is you're trying to pull yourself back.
Yeah.
And I like that idea of like not losing where you started
Hmm.
and everything being cyclical.
Everything being cyclical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, so we're almost at the end. I wanted to ask about two things. Firstly, I know that both your practices are very research heavy. There's lots of research that goes in. I mean, Roshan has spent like how many years? Like you have like 2 degrees or something. Very research heavy practices. And I want to know like what role does literature have in your works? Like, do you ever accompany your works with like a writer? Now you're building this whole world. Are you writing about it? What methods do you use to expand your universe? And Roshan, I feel like I know this answer. Your answer is yes. But talk about the writing and the literature that accompanies your work, because now you're saying that with people learning about the Asafo flag and whatnot, sometimes, I mean, if they see your work, they might not immediately know. They have to go and read about, what exactly it is that they're seeing. So yeah, it'd be great to talk about literature. And then the last thing, maybe you can segue. Well, let's talk about that first, and then last question.
I guess I'll go first. So literature in general plays like a huge part in the inspiration behind the work and in the work itself, in that I read a lot as a kid. I read a lot of fantasy and sort of toys coming to life, and the same, we still had like this, we had like the Anansi stories, we had like we had this TV show for children called By the Fireside, where they would tell these different sort of like fables and proverbs and like stories of like all these different, they're not necessarily true stories, but it was basically a means to an end in like teaching a lesson. And there's something really beautiful about like the oral tradition that comes out of Ghana. And I would say like I want to speak for West Africa or Africa as a whole, but I'm going to speak for Ghana because that's where I'm from. Where the stories are told in a very sort of like poetic, proverbial way, where it's not a straightforward sort of um, story. There's really it's almost like it's operating on multiple levels where it's the story and then it's like what it really means and then what you're sort of like learning or what you're supposed to learn from it. And I think there's something sort of beautiful about looking at or creating sort of like a culture or a storytelling culture that sort of like is supposed to be passed on from generation to generation, but also has this like quite beautiful and nuanced way of reading and understanding it. And I try, and I think not that I try, but I like to sort of like approach my work in the same way of like, you're making something that is quite ambiguous in a sense, or like you're trying to tell a story or tell this or tell or create or I don't know, yeah, tell a story, I would say. And you want to find a way to tell it where it's operating on multiple levels, where somebody can look at it and say, this is an interesting scene, or this is an interesting thing I'm looking at. I don't really know what it means. And then hopefully you stay and you look at it a little bit more, and then some things start to reveal themselves to you. And not it might not necessarily be like the story that I, the artist, am telling, but there's something about sort of like staying with the artwork and then having it speak to you in a different way that may be different from like the very first time that you read or saw the artwork. And so that's like, I think that's like quite a major part of the way I approach my practice and like I try to make my works. But I also, in terms of research, I am obviously, even though I'm sort of uh, how do I say, not referencing, but um, employing um, elements of speculative fiction. I'm obviously basing it off of or sort of riffing off of things that have been written or that have existed in history, or like cosmology, like Vodun cosmology, which is like a religion that is practiced to this day in different parts of Ghana and Togo and Benin. And so, and there are these stories and sort of like, I don't say literature specifically because that has, I don't know whether it's like it has a specific connotation towards it, but in terms of like the oral traditions and the stories and whatever um, sort of histories have been passed on from generation to generation, there's something there that it has persisted. And so being able to sort of like read about this and then riff off of it and sort of have my own, and not have my own interpretation, but read, understand it, and then interpret it in a way that sort of like, still pays homage to the original, but also sort of like takes it in like a different direction, I think is quite interesting and quite exciting. And it's always sort of like amazing. For me, like the joy of researching comes because I have like a brain, and I have all these ideas that kind of go like this. I have all these disparate things going on in my head, and then I read something, and then everything just comes together like this, and it's like so exciting and quite sort of. I look forward to that moment all the time, and it's like it really is quite a powerful moment, I guess, when I'm sort of in the throes of like figuring out what the next step is going to be, or like how I want to tie all these ideas together. Is then I read something about, the different, I don't know, gods of the Vodun cosmology, and then like how, currently new gods are being added to the pantheon. Like that's ties in perfectly to what I'm trying to do, because I'm creating like an alternative I guess like alternative world where there are these new gods that are have been brought into the pantheon. And so that kind of like has this interesting link to reality, which I think is quite beautiful and would only be known because I did the research and because I read, I sort of went and looked out for the information. And so, there's this back and forth with, trying to find out more information, but also like using my imagination, because I do love to sort of like like come up with stuff and then see how I can sort of apply the things I've learned to, newer and sort of like more sort of personal ideas and see what comes from that.
Yeah, I don't know, I've always been a little bit of a bookworm slash a nerd. when it comes to like stories and fictional, and I love to read. I love fantasy as well, but I also love to, as a child, I loved to read mythologies from everywhere. And I think
Yeah.
I can see that in your work and how that feeds into, because it gives you answers.
It
It gives
does.
you answers. It really does. And for me, writing is a big part of what I do, and research in that sense. I usually, I don't know, it depends. It's either I go for making an image first, or I write a poem first, and I really get into what it is I'm trying to say. And then I go into the research, go into the recently more going into the archive, going into history, looking at more, I don't know, what is the framework for what I'm trying to say. Trying to find, and again as well, yeah, I wrote down Cydia Hartman with critical fabulation, and using that, how to interact with that within the work as well, and
Yeah.
having that bridge between academia and art making is a big part of the practice. It takes a lot more time.
Yeah.
Definitely
It
takes a lot more
does.
time. Yeah. And you're like, oh, okay. And I love to try and, I guess, trigger myself and look at frameworks, like, no, it's not frameworks. Try to look at sort of ideologies that I don't agree with, right? Looking at maybe very historically inaccurate, or maybe they something that hasn't aged well. And to try and really create an opinion or what I want to say that is more whole and a bit more objective. But yeah, it's been my practice has been very, very, very research heavy. Because I've just graduated, and I'm glad I took the time to do that. I think at first I was like watching everyone else. I'm like, well, I'm here reading my book, and I'm typing my thesis, and I'm watching all of the other kids go out to play, sort of situation.
Yeah.
But I'm so grateful for that time that I took to really understand what I want to say, and in terms of like mythology and culture, and especially within my own culture, but also finding how that connects to West African culture as well. I think for, at least for me, I can't speak for everyone, but at least for me, there's a comfort. There's beauty in this sort of creolized history that I found within my research, but there's also a comfort that those threads haven't been cut, you know. There is still, like, you know, is it fufu or is it Johnny Cake, you know, is it,
Or
you
Nanny of the Marines
see,
or Maroons, yeah.
and having that bridge between like sort of the mother culture and also this culture, and then those identities being totally sovereign and valid in their own right, but also in collective. I am very much a Pan-African in that sense.
Yeah.
And so taking the time to do the research and to write and to really go into that as a part of my practice is, I think, been a privilege, because it's allowed me to really be able to sit in who I am as a person. And then I can create something from that space that I know, or at least I hope it is my wish, that is going to make a difference. And so in a way, it's art for expression, but then there's also art, maybe is it activism, or is it pushing the full culture forward? And I think that's something that's so prevalent in your work as well, pushing these ideas, and also there's not losing this place as a woman, a Black woman, as an experience, and the research really allowed me to do that, I think.
Thank you guys. Powerful stuff. Okay, so my last thing, sorry to ask you guys this. I know everyone hates this question. What is next? What do you everyone hates that, but what is more research do you want to do? Are there things in your practice that you haven't explored that you want to explore next? I've spoken to both of you separately about this, but I guess now it's time to speak to each other about it. And then you know, when we do release this, I hope that it will be watched by aspiring women artists. And again, another question that people might not like: do you have advice? You have advice Advice in the sense of like Richard, what you just said, sit and learn who you are, why you're doing what you're doing, what you want to do before, embarking on that. It doesn't have to be, anything crazy, but it's what are you doing next, or what do you want to explore next? And is there anything you'd want to tell an aspiring woman artist or yourself before you started this journey?
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll go first then, since I've been going first. Um, so I am deep in research, knee deep in research currently. I've been wanting to create a body of work that tells the story of how um, the skins came to be. So I kind of wanted to be like the birth of of the gods or goddesses, or sort of, this, yeah, the characters, like how they came to be. And so I've basically been doing research into cosmology and mythology and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I've also been working on, because this is still kind of like a world building practice, and I have all these sort of like interconnected interests. I've been designing like an architectural space that I would like for this story. I would like the story to have to happen in. And so it's sort of like an all-encompassing type thing where there's a space, there's the scenery. I'm hoping to sort of have something that could translate into like a larger scale um, kind of an immersive type installation, which sort of like tells the story of like the birth of these different characters, of these different gods. So yeah, that's, long story short, that's kind of what I've been working on now. And it's taking on all these different sort of like directions, because there's all this stuff that is connected that I kind of, there are all these things that I don't know, loose ends that I would like to tie off, and to make the story really make sense, because this is meant to be like the beginning of the work, really, even though it's been 4 years since I actually started the work. And so I really want to sort of take my time and make something sort of like that would stand the test of time, so to speak, because this is meant to be something that, is supposed to be an ongoing story for the rest of my career, I guess. And so I'm taking it very seriously, but at the same time, I'm having fun with it. And I've been, working through different types of materials and different substrates and stuff to see how I could sort of bring this story to life, and what I can combine, what different sort of media I can combine, um, to see what it will look like in its final form. Um, this being said, like what advice I would have for past me, or anyone who is sort of starting out as an artist. My issue when I started out was that I was so caught up in the thinking about how to do the thing that I never really did the thing. And you can waste a lot of time being scared or unsure, or feeling like all your ducks are not in a row, um, and not actually put time in to start making the work. And I feel like work begets work, or like the artwork. You do the artwork, and then whatever comes from it, you sort of like know what you don't might not necessarily know what to do next, but you might know what not to do next. And so you're kind of learning from doing. So just do. This is my advice.
I think that's like the best advice, especially if you're like, no, I want to really think. I want to think everything through.
Yeah.
I think that is the best advice. For me, what is next right now? I am through with uni, and now it's time for me to do for the doing and to play. And so yeah, I've got a residency at the moment, so I'm hoping
Cool.
some fruit will grow from that, and hoping to allow the environment to really change the work. And
Mhm.
I'm excited. I think at the moment it's about freeing up a little bit my creative process, expressing myself a little bit more playfully in terms of just going for it. I love to. I think I got hung up a little bit on like, oh no, a painter should paint. No, a painter can make sculptures. It doesn't matter. Like, don't allow to limit yourself. And so I really want to continue not limiting myself and just going for it. So I'm hoping that's where the work will take me. I'm exploring, man-made water, or in Jamaican culture, the river mama.
Mm.
And I'm still with Anansi, but I'm now sort of trying to figure out this character, trying to go to places where she's been. She is a very morally gray character, so very like maybe a villain, maybe.
Hmm.
I think I need to explore that, both personally, allowing myself to go into her lore,
Yeah.
um, and her danger, but also seeing how that connects with my own lore, my own sort of
Yeah.
mythology that I've sort of kind of figured out with myself. So I'm really excited about that. I'm genuinely just kind of ready to get going, and hopefully Ashley today will be going on a hike to go
Ah,
and see one of these
cool.
places. I still refer to myself as a baby artist, and so kind of feels a little bit odd to give advice. What do I say to myself? Have conversations like these with other artists. Really find people that inspire you. Find your mentors. They can be anybody, and that's what I've done. Like literally, like my nephew, he's a mentor to me. That's how I see it. Um, that would be my biggest advice. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. Don't be afraid to like connect with people, and give yourself grace. Give yourself grace. It is not a race,
Mm-mm.
and your voice is still valid. Don't try and do things to please other people. That's where the secret sauce is. It's when you do things just for yourself. That would be my
Yeah.
biggest advice. And I'm telling that to myself as well. Yeah.
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 That's great advice. Mhm.
Okay, thank you guys. We have come to the end of, I'll put my video. Okay, cool.
Bye.
And I just on my desk. Comes to the end of our session. Thank you so much. I think this was great. I hope you guys had fun.
Yeah,
Sid, I love
it
this
was great.
conversation. Thank you so much, Na.
Thank
It's
you too.
thank you
It was
so
great
much,
to meet
Sid.
you finally. It was like I'm
Yeah.
like went so deep into your practice, and it's like very nice to like talk to you about, about the work and like your interests and stuff. Your writing is incredible, and I
Thank
really,
you.
really enjoyed reading your thesis. Like I was like writing notes down, like, okay, I need to
Thank
go
you.
read this and read that. So yeah, it was very incredible to meet you and speak with you.
I have to say, like, it's like meeting one of my heroes, because I was like, hold up a second. My work is going to be in an exhibition with, oh my God.
Oh
So,
my
no,
God.
that like, for me, that's like, it's like, I don't know, I'm containing it, but I'm so grateful to be able to have this conversation with you and get to learn about your work. And I'm a fan of your work, and
That means a
I
lot.
would
Thank you.
love to keep in contact as well. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
for sure. And thank you for reading my thesis. I don't think even my
I
mom has
was
read my
deep. I
thesis.
was deep in there. I was deep in there. I was deep in there. It was really
Thank you.
interesting. I love your concept of archiving. Very, very interesting stuff. But yeah.
Thank
Halfway
you.
through
Thank you.
it.